Good evening, and welcome to Royalty Report UK. Tonight we lead with a revelation that has sent shockwaves through the upper echelons of the British establishment and sparked a visceral backlash from clinical professionals across the globe. As we observe these developments on this Sunday, March 15, 2026, a singular, staggering figure has surfaced that threatens to dismantle the very credibility of the Sussex brand. $2,378. This is the entry price for a seat in Melbourne this April, to hear Prince Harry deliver a keynote on workplace mental health. Yet, as our investigation reveals, this is not a clinical workshop led by a licensed practitioner. It is a high-priced performance by a man with no degree in psychology, no formal training in counseling, and no professional standing in the field of mental health science. Experts are now warning that the gap between the prince's stated advocacy and his actual lack of qualifications is becoming a liability that could prove damaging to the millions who take his advice as institutional gospel. The word being used by credentialed observers is no longer controversial. It is dangerous. To grasp the magnitude of this crisis, we must look past the superficial gloss of celebrity PR and examine the cold, calculated mechanics of institutional reputation management. For the first time in 7 years, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are preparing to touch down in Australia, a nation that once greeted them with euphoric, record-breaking crowds during their 2018 tour. But the atmosphere in 2026 has turned clinical and increasingly cynical. The upcoming visit, which strategically blends private commercial business with the lofty language of philanthropy, has turned the country upside down overnight. While the organizers frame the summit in the noble language of urgent social purpose, the ticket prices tell a far more cynical story. With VIP packages for Harry's summit and Meghan's Her Best Life retreat in Sydney reaching several £1,000s, the Australian public is asking a blunt and uncomfortable question. If this mission is truly about mental health awareness for the many, why is it being gated behind a wall of extreme wealth accessible only to the few? The most damning indictment, however, comes from the very professional circles that Prince Harry is attempting to influence. Credentialed analysts like Neil Sean have been remarkably blunt, suggesting that for a prince to lecture a global audience on psychosocial safety without clinical vetting is a recipe for long-term institutional damage. In the United Kingdom and Australia, mental health practitioners are bound by strict legal codes, professional boards, and ethical standards. By leveraging a royal title to operate in a space where advocacy has replaced professional accountability, the Duke is entering a perilous landscape. This is what experts describe as the commodification of vulnerability, where personal trauma is packaged as authority in a scientific field without the prerequisite education. The danger lies in the potential for unvetted advice to be internalized by an impressionable public as if it were clinical fact, bypassing the rigorous guardrails that protect patients in a traditional medical setting. Furthermore, the structure of these upcoming events appears designed to prioritize brand protection over genuine, transparent discourse. We have learned that despite the exorbitant fees, the engagement is strictly controlled through pre-screened and predetermined questions. This means that while the prince speaks on psychosocial safety, the protection of workers from management cultures that cause psychological harm, the audience is effectively barred from asking him about his own record as an employer. You cannot ask about the reported turnover of staff at Arche, nor can you inquire whether former employees felt psychologically safe when they were suddenly let go from the organization. It is a controlled narrative performance where the script is sanitized to protect a brand that is increasingly at odds with its own history. This creates a structural irony that is impossible to ignore. A speaker advocating for workplace safety while shielding himself from the very accountability that defines a healthy professional environment. This pivot to the Australian market is not a choice made from a position of strength, but a strategic necessity born of a cooling business empire in North America. To analyze the state of the Sussex finances in early 2026 is to look at a ledger in significant crisis. Their landmark Netflix deal, once heralded as the ultimate financial escape, was quietly downgraded to a precarious first look arrangement, following a series of high-profile production delays and underwhelming viewership numbers. Recent filings reveal that the Arche Foundation is facing a staggering $2.5 million deficit, with major donors retreating as the initial curiosity of the Sussex exit fades. In this context, the high-priced Australian retreats look less like a diplomatic mission and more like a high-stakes search for a new revenue stream. The Sussex experiment is meeting the reality of the global marketplace, where symbolic value is no longer a sufficient currency, and consistent production is the only metric that matters. As the April tour approaches, the question is no longer just about the cost of a ticket. It is about the cost of institutional integrity. This is the moment where the glamour of the Sussexes meets the unforgiving scrutiny of reality. And the world is watching closely now. The shift from California's coast to the Australian stage is being managed with the precision of a military operation. Yet the logistical brilliance cannot mask the growing friction between the Sussexes and the veteran royal commentators who have tracked their every move since 2018. In London, the reaction to this million-dollar tour has been one of calculated silence from the palace. But the corridors of power are buzzing with a different energy. Insiders suggest that the King's advisors are monitoring the Australian reception with acute interest, specifically regarding the use of quasi-royal status to bolster private equity ventures. This is the core of the institutional dilemma. A prince of the realm is effectively selling access and insight at a price point that contradicts the charitable mandate of the monarchy he still technically represents. The optics of a £1,000 meet and greet in a country currently grappling with a cost of living crisis are being described by social historians as a profound misreading of the global mood. Simultaneously, the Her Best Life retreat, led by the Duchess in Sydney, is facing its own set of structural critiques. While the promotional material promises a transformative journey of empowerment and wellness, the fine print reveals a strictly curated environment where the participants are as much a part of the brand aesthetic as the speakers themselves. Marketing experts point out that this is a classic aspirational vacuum strategy, creating a high barrier entry to maintain an aura of exclusivity that can then be sold back to the masses through social media highlights. However, the Australian media landscape is notoriously less deferential than its American counterpart. Investigative journalists in Melbourne have already begun digging into the sponsorship ties behind the summit, raising questions about whether the workplace mental health angle is merely a Trojan horse for a series of new corporate partnerships. Beyond the financial mechanics, there is the brewing storm of public sentiment among the Australian youth, a demographic the Sussexes once claimed as their primary constituency. Recent polling indicates a sharp decline in Sussex sympathy among Gen Z and millennials, who are increasingly skeptical of high net worth individuals lecturing on struggle from positions of extreme privilege. This authenticity gap is becoming the defining challenge of the 2026 tour. When the Duke speaks on the podium about the burnout of the modern worker, he is doing so while reportedly staying in a 5-figure-a-night penthouse suite, shielded from the very economic realities his audience faces daily. This disconnect is no longer just a PR hurdle. It is a fundamental flaw in the product they are offering. Furthermore, the legal implications of these high-priced advice sessions are starting to attract the attention of regulatory bodies. In several jurisdictions, the line between motivational speaking and unregulated psychological consulting is becoming increasingly blurred. If a participant at a high-priced Sussex summit acts upon life strategies shared during a keynote and suffers a setback, Who holds the professional liability? Without a clinical board to answer to, the Duke and Duchess are operating in a gray zone that many in the medical community find unacceptable. As the countdown to April begins, the pressure is mounting not just to perform, but to justify a price tag that has arguably placed the Sussex brand out of reach of the very people they claim to serve. This pivot to the Australian market is not a choice made from a position of strength, but a strategic necessity born of a cooling business empire in North America. To analyze the state of the Sussex finances in early 2026 is to look at a ledger in significant crisis. Their landmark Netflix deal, once heralded as the ultimate financial escape, was quietly downgraded following a series of production delays and underwhelming viewership. Recent filings reveal the Arche Foundation is facing a multi-million-dollar deficit, with major donors retreating as the initial curiosity fades. In this context, the high-priced Australian retreats look less like a diplomatic mission and more like a high-stakes search for a new revenue stream. The Sussex experiment is meeting the reality of the global marketplace, where symbolic value is no longer a sufficient currency, and consistent production is the only metric that matters. As the April tour approaches, the question is no longer just about the cost of a ticket. It is about the cost of institutional integrity. This is the moment where the glamour of the Sussexes meets the unforgiving scrutiny of reality. And the world is watching closely now. As we conclude this investigation into the shifting tides of the Sussex brand, we want to hear from you. Is the $2,300 price tag a fair reflection of the insights being offered? Or is this the final fracture in the Duke and Duchess's relationship with the public? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Royalty Report UK for the most in-depth analysis of the stories shaping the British establishment. Thank you for watching.